it this time because I really wanted to think a little bit about how I want to introduce our speaker today, the person that I invited, which is Pat, and Pat invited Lauretta. I don't have the privilege of knowing Lauretta yet, but I have the privilege to listen to Pat when she joins our sponsee family meeting. I have to tell you that it's like I think she would be the drop the mic kind of person in our meeting because like it is always I get like a shower of something every time she speaks. She is strong but yet a steady spirit. She really every time she speaks I'm taking notes and I hang them in a little special thing I have by my bed. She's full of wisdom and a very kind light, and I can wait for all of you to enjoy what I enjoy when she joins to our meeting. So Pat and Loretta, welcome. The floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Raquel. That's uh, that's quite an introduction, and I'm just going to share my story. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting us to come out and share this evening. And my sponsor is here, Ralph White, and thank you for being here. I was, given the opportunity to shared this meeting, and Raquel explained to me that it's a conversation about God. She said it's not an AA meeting, but we took the theme from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're welcome to invite someone to be in conversation with you. And when I thought about it, of course, I thought about my sponsor first, but I knew that he had already spoken at this particular meeting. And so I was thinking, who would I really enjoy having a conversation about God with? And I said, well, why not the person that I'm always talking to and God always comes up in the conversation, and she happens to be an alcoholic as well. So my name is Pat Parker. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 10th, 1988. Not that I have to have that to qualify here, I guess. And I want to introduce my friend Lauretta S. We're both in Los Angeles. I met Lauretta early in my sobriety, and she has always been very steady. And these last years, she has been somebody that I could talk to, envision with, and our conversations always include God. No matter what we're talking about, no matter how we begin, God somehow enters into the conversation, and I walk away with what I need because we've invited God into the conversation. And so to begin with, I also invited Lauretta because her story in particular stands out for me. And I'm going to give her an opportunity to talk about her relationship, how she developed her relationship with God. And so I think we'll begin there, and I'll start, and then she'll jump in, and then we're going to go back and forth, and we'll see where God takes us in this conversation. So, I grew up in a household of faith. My grandparents, I spent most of my developmental years in their household, and they were Christian pastors. They were very progressive for their time. They ran a small mission near downtown Los Angeles, and they partnered with Jewish synagogues and Presbyterian churches in the valley to form an interracial camp. And I grew up with principles of diversity and inclusion that my grandparents gave to me. At the time that we were growing up, or at the time I was growing up, it seemed to be the issue of the day, race relations. And so these organizations came together. My grandfather, his insurance man, John McCone, a white man, they started this conversation seemingly out of the blue about Black and white relations, race relations. And John McCone was part of the Methodist Church. And what happened was that conversation led to them forming this interracial camp where every year they would send 100 white kids and 100 black kids to camp every summer. They would fundraise throughout the entire year. But what their hope was is that as we came together, that we would see that we were more alike than we were different. And that we would, in fact, whatever differences we found, we would be able to celebrate that. And so I grew up in this household being exposed to these ideals and these ideologies. And growing up and being exposed to that, it gave me comfort on one level. I began to be comfortable in my blackness, but that there was some other things going on with me. And I remember having nightmares. So I've always believed, but I remember as a kid waking up from nightmares, and I would go and wake up my grandfather and ask him to pray for me. And I did that because I believed that if he prayed for me, that God would hear him and the nightmares would go away. And so here I am, in the middle of the night, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, whenever it was, and I'd go and wake him up and ask him to pray for me because I was having a nightmare. And so when I was about 9 years old, one morning at the breakfast table, my grandfather said to me, he said, I really love it that you come to me when you're afraid and that you trust my relationship with God, that he would hear me and that you're able to go back to sleep. And he says, I want you to know that you can always come to me. He said, but also want you to know is that you can talk to God for yourself and that he will hear you. He said, and I want to suggest that you try that. Just try it one time. He said, now don't get me wrong. You can still come to me whenever you get ready, but why don't you try talking to God yourself? And so the next time I had a nightmare, I took his suggestion. And just like any child, I woke up and in a childlike language, I said, God, I'm scared and I want to be able to go back to sleep. Can you take away the nightmare? So I can go back to sleep? The next thing that I knew, it was time to get up for breakfast and get ready for school. And from that day forward, I was introduced into a direct relationship with God without a mediator. And I needed God at different times in my life. I'll jump to, let me switch it over to Lauretta and let her talk about her childhood experiences with God.
Hi, Pat. Thank you again for the honor of talking about one of my favorite subjects. I always said one of them because I like talking about myself. So, but God is another subject that I like to talk about. So I'm honored to be here with you, and thank you, Raquel, and everyone here that's here to listen to us share. And I'm listening to Pat, and Pat and I are close friends. I consider us to be close friends, and we do talk often, and we talk about God, and we talk about those times when, for me, when it's not easy for me to communicate with God, to feel God's presence, or to even know God's will. So I'm listening to Pat talk about how she grew up and thinking about, how we're so much more similar than we are different, but yet my experience is totally different from hers. I grew up as a Muslim under Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, so totally different God than everybody around me and around us. And only time we saw people that believed like we believed was on a Wednesday, Friday, or a Sunday when we went to the temple. But my parents and my family had a really, really strong belief in our religion. And that's all I knew at that time was that religion. But I don't really remember if I had been introduced to prayer before 9 years old. So I just heard you say at 9 years old, you went to your grandfather. And at 9 years old, my mother asked us to pray for her sister who was having a child, but the child was in distress. And so she said, we need to pray for the baby. And I literally prayed for the baby and assumed that the baby would then be coming home in a couple of days. That did not happen. The baby did not live. And so when I asked my mother, so what time will they be here? And she said the baby didn't live. I said to myself, well, then why did we pray? Because I always thought at that time at 9 years old that if you pray, your prayers are going to be answered in the positive, always in the positive. So since I was only praying because that's what I was taught to do, I stopped praying. And as a result of stop praying, I stopped believing. I stopped believing in God, in a personal relationship with God, or a God that could hear me, could respond to my needs. So my God became my parents, especially my mother. That was the person that I went to when I felt any kind of discomfort. She was my go-to person. And I grew up like that until I got to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I went all the way from 9 years old till when I got sober at 36 to without a God of my own understanding. Now, in the meantime, growing up, I had some times when I really needed a power greater than me. And the only power that I would listen to or even hear would be my mother. And so I didn't have anyone to take care of me in those trying times, those times when I wasn't getting what I wanted or what I expected to happen. And but I believed in her, and she believed in the creator. That's what she called God, was the creator. And I will be able to tell you more about that experience of having a mother who believed in a creator and who believed in her children and gave what God had given her. And at that time, I didn't even know God had given it to her. So I'm excited to talk about God. I really am, because I still can't believe sometimes that I lived that whole entire time without the ability to believe in God. So I'm gonna let you.
Man, that's what I love about this conversation with you and I this evening. So what happened for me is that um, I'm going along and I'm praying, and I just have this um, unshakable faith in God. I just believe. And I'm growing up, and by the time I'm 12, there's two more things that I believe. Number one, that I'm called to preach the gospel. And number two, that I'm going to hell. And that was so difficult. And see, by 12, you know, I told you guys I grew up with this, going to this interracial camp, but we always came back to the neighborhood that we lived in, which was predominantly Black. But when, I was, but I was, my language was pristine because I grew up in this household of faith, meaning that I didn't curse. And I started reading really early. And so I sounded like, well, this is what they told me in the neighborhood. You sound like a white girl. And I didn't know what that meant. I mean, today I understood what they meant was that I was articulate, but that's not exclusive to white folk, right? And so what I did to fix being talked about is I started learning how to curse. I couldn't even curse right. And when I would try to cuss right around the kids, they would just laugh at me. They would just get hysterical because I'd get the words all messed up because I'm practicing. And I learned how to practice to get things right that were wrong for me very early on. Mm-hmm. And eventually I got it right. I got it so right that I could not stop cursing. It's one of my vices today. I still curse. And it's not like I'm really trying to get rid of it. It's just that I don't want to mess up and curse in the pulpit, right? It just wouldn't be appropriate. So when I really, have been praying, but there was this church service where there was a very direct invitation that I answered. And it was about salvation. Today, I already know that I did believe, so it wasn't about that, but there was a formal invitation that I answered in the faith tradition that I grew up in. And so it was with everything in me, I gave myself to God. And then about a week later, and what I thought it meant to be a Christian, what I thought it meant to be in a clear, uh, unblocked relationship with God is that I had to be good.
Mm.
I associated God with good, or me being in relationship with God, or God being in relationship with me as being good, a good girl. And so what happened was that a week after I had given myself wholeheartedly to God, Lauretta, I started cursing again. And I was saying, oh man, it didn't work.
Mm.
It didn't work. I mean, I believed I was called to preach, but then here I am and I can't stop cursing. And it's like, I don't know about this. Growing up, also in the faith that I grew up in, they did not believe in women or ordaining women. And I
Mm.
remember going to my grandfather when I was 12 and telling him that I believed that God had told me I was called to preach. He didn't say anything. In fact, he was silent. And I didn't know it until many years later that he was silent on the matter because the denomination did not ordain women. But he had talked to me about God, and he had told me about God, and he had told me that I would be able to hear God for myself. So he could not say that I didn't hear God. That was a quandary. So he said nothing. What he did do was put me in positions within the church growing up as a kid to, be on program and to teach, Sunday school. So I developed that way. But I began to notice the gender bias, and it really frustrated me. And it made me feel really different. And it
Mm.
made me begin to question not just the church, but my grandfather.
Mm.
And my grandfather, I would have to say, was my first God because I believed, he was bigger than everything. And then he introduced me to God, and then I began to question the things that he taught me. And by then, as I began to grow and questioning and wondering if this is so or whatever, and the resentment, I got to high school and I needed a drink, and I started drinking in high school. And shortly after that, I really needed God desperately. I stopped talking to God. I used to pray without fail every day. I was talking to God every day growing up. And then somewhere I just stopped talking to God and went on my own. And I walked away from the faith. Still kind of believing, but not really. I really believe that, well, I hope I'll make it in to the good place before I die, or whatever that took. So, Alcoholics Anonymous, coming to AA and surrendering because of the disease. And what happened for me simply was that I was on lockdown in my mother's house about 3 o'clock in the morning, desperate for another drink. I don't know if you remember what it's like to need one more drink and you can't get it. That feeling like you're going to die. I was in that state of desperation. And right about then, I remember my grandmother's words coming back to me. And what she said was, baby, if you ever get in trouble and you cannot find your way out, you can call on the name of the Lord. He will hear you, he will save you, and he will deliver you. And right about then, though, the problem with that is that my relationship with God, as I understood God, had been severed. It had been disrupted by my lack of faith. And so, but I was desperate. So I got on my knees and I took my references with me and I said, God, my grandmother said that I could come and that you would hear me. And what I said is that I surrender unconditionally. And I promise you that if you deliver me from this, that I'll tell somebody, and I will tell somebody that it was you. And I got up. I had visited AA before. I called central office. They directed me to a meeting, and my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous began in earnest. But the thing is that this relationship now took a different form. And again, I had associated God with being good. And I will tell you, even then, I associated God with being good. There's this term in the Christian faith called salvation. And I thought that salvation meant, well, I was ready to surrender and not have no more fun. I likened being sober to being saved. I was ready to give it up. I'm ready not to have no more fun. I'm going to just go head on in. And thank God I just went anyway. Thank God for desperation, because I found out otherwise. Lauretta?
Again, listening for the similarities and not the differences. And that's what I had to eventually do, Pat, is once I cross what, we say in the big book, or say in meetings about crossing this invisible line, where my drinking and using went from a social thing to it's necessary for me to do these things. It was necessary for me not even knowing that I had lost that ability. And here I am, agnostic, and I didn't even know that term agnostic until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't relate it to me. I just said, I don't believe in God. I knew that there was a creator because my mother said all the time, she said, well, Lauretta, I don't know what you've created, but I said, oh, well, Mama, I'm just saying, I don't know how you believe. And she says, because I do. She said, that's what faith is, believing. She said, well, I believe that there's a God. And I would debate with her so much about this God till she just said, well, it's really okay that you don't believe. And I said, it is. She said, yeah, because he still exists. And she'd go on about her business. What I got from that is the love of my mother. It did not matter to her that I did not think like she felt, think like she thought, felt like she felt, and couldn't get on the same page, and without any understanding. And I never told her about not believing at 9 years old. And maybe she could have told me then how God really worked, how prayer worked. But I went on, and I grew up, and I remember going to the temple until finally one Sunday I said, I don't even really understand why I have to keep going since I don't believe. And she said, okay, you can stay home, but you got to do this, and this, So I had to do the chores that everybody else my other sisters might have helped with. And so that's the way I grew up, and never having a problem with not having a God, because I could always go to her. When anything happened, I'd go to my mother or my father if something didn't go well. So here I get to find out that if, I'm listening and for these steps, and I know she said it's not an AA meeting, but this is how I got to God, is that I go to these meetings and they tell me that I'm powerless, and that I'm going to need a power greater than me in order to stay sober. And it's like, oh boy, what an order. I can't go through with it. What am I going to do? Because I had listened to people, but I only knew God as a religion. I never knew God as a spiritual God. So I knew that I wasn't going to stay in the Muslim faith, because that didn't allow you to drink and use and wear short skirts and do all the stuff that I like to do. So I knew I wasn't going to go back to that faith. And I couldn't understand Christianity because of all the stuff that I had been taught as a Muslim. So I'm in this quandary. And then I go to a meeting and I tell somebody I'm in trouble because I've got to do this third step, and I don't even believe in God. And this is prior to me getting to the chapter of we agnostics. And this is the gift that I was giving you all. Pat, this is the best gift that I was given in Alcoholics Anonymous, is that person told me that I could have a God of my own understanding. And I said, what does that mean? She says, you just decide what kind of God you want. I said, well, how do you do that? And she said, but I don't even know if that's possible. She says, you don't believe there's a possibility? I said, anything is possible. When she said, okay, that's the first step. And I said, what next? And she said, pray. I said, oh, no, don't pray. She said, then talk. I said, talk to God? She said, yeah. And I said, what do I say? And she said, anything you want. I said, what? And this is where I was. I'm in this place of desperation. So I'm willing to try this she said that you could just talk to God and I could say anything I wanted to say. And that particular night, I went home full of fear that I still again may not be able to reach this God, that I knew that I needed some kind of power. I didn't know what it was going to be. I thought it was going to be the man that I was with, but the man that I was with wasn't able to stop me from doing what I was doing. So I go home, but I had a backup. When you talk about the backup, your grandfather, by this time, my backup is my youngest brother, who was very spiritual. He loved God. He believed in God. And I said, you know what? I got to do this third step, and I don't even know if it's going to work. And my brother, who loves me so much, he said, I got you. I said, huh? And he said, I got your back. And I said, oh, so if it doesn't work, you're going to take care of me? And I believed him. And I was able to go to God unconditionally with that gift of you can talk to God and say whatever you want. But I knew about respecting a higher power. And I didn't even know the word higher power, but I knew about respecting authority. I respected my parents. So I didn't go to God flippant. I went with him to God in desperation with a few simple things. I said, they told me I can no longer drink and use, that I'm not going to be able to do it on my own, and that I need you. And I said, but let me tell you something, God. I knew what to call him, God. I said, let me tell you this, though. You can't talk out loud, and you can't shake my bed. So I don't know how I'm going to know you're working, but you can't do those two things. And I was so sincere. And even in that moment of talking to God, I did not even really know that it was working. But I went to bed. I went to sleep real quick, just in case he wasn't listening, in case he wanted to do it his way. And I woke up the next day and I said, well, now, if he can't talk to you, I wonder, because people would say God talks to him. It's like, well, I've never heard God talk, so I don't know. Then I told him he can't talk. How am I going to know? And I saw a bumper sticker. My husband's driving to work. And it says, the bumper sticker said, let go, let God. And I looked at that bumper sticker and I heard this girl say, is it possible? And I said, I wonder, did he just send me a message? And from there, I got to work and I'm walking down the hall and somebody says, you sure are glowing. And I say, I wonder what the heck the glow is. And they said, my office mate, I said, somebody said I'm glowing. She said, that's called the glow of God. I said, what? So I said, well, I'm going to have to test this guy because he can't talk out loud. So he might be sending me some messages. So I said, I had been going to meetings and they talked about the message, not the messenger. And so I had to make this presentation to a full room of executive men. And I said, I know my message, so I'm not going to worry about what they think of Lauretta, the person. I'm just going to deliver the message. Pat, at the end of that message, at the end of my presentation, they gave me a standing ovation. It was like, what? They said, Loretta, we didn't know you could do that. It's like, huh. And I wanted to tell them, well, I got God. It's like, just like that. That thing of luck and coincidence changed into possibility. It's a possibility. So God, this God that I serve, he said, oh, shoot, I got her now. So he started just shooting blessings at me. He just started shooting stuff so quick till I said, oh, hold up. It's coming too fast. I had made an investment when I was 19, 20 years old. It hit when I was 6 months sober. When I got this guy, then all of a sudden this money paid. I get all of this money. A girl had told me about angels. And I said, oh, no, angel. It's just people that do good things. She said about leaving her wallet and someone returning her purse at her house. And I said, oh, no, that was just a good Samaritan. That was how I talked at that time. And then I go to the grocery store. This is a whole different event, but I go to the grocery store, and as I'm opening the door, I put my purse on top of the car without even realizing it. And as I'm driving off, it's somebody honking the horn to tell me that my purse was on top of the car. And I heard her say, see, there are angels. And so God started showing up for me like that, where I saw that I didn't make it happen. So all those times when my mother would say, well, you didn't make none of this happen. So is it possible? She didn't say it in those words. She just said it as a matter of fact. Well, that was God, and she always told me about counting my blessings, Pat. So I get so excited about the idea that I was incapable of believing because I didn't know how to reach God. I didn't know how to go, what door to go through. And that all they told me is that if you believe that there's a possibility there's a God, then you can have your own God. And that's all I said simply is this: just don't talk out loud and don't shake the bed. I'm going to figure it out. And he gave me that. And, and to this day, 37 years later, I still get choked up at that idea that this power was just laying in wait for me to discover how to get to him. Now that's my belief. And my mother said that if you believe it, it's true. So that's my belief, is that he heard my cry at that particular moment and the way that I came to him. And he has been carrying me ever since. In our last few minutes, because, both you and I could talk, like you said, we could talk about God for days. I could talk about God, and I want to just talk about those blessings that I received. And then I'm giving it back to you, because the blessings, y'all, I have to tell y'all, I was with that man. I told you he's my husband now, but he was not my husband when I got sober. But he asked me to marry him, and I've been married to him 30-something years now. And then I had never had a child. And 4 years sober, I get pregnant. I have a child. The child needs to be introduced to God. So I said, well, I got to take him somewhere. Now I got to go to a church. So I take him to a church. I end up joining the church because of my child. And asked me to join a choir. I joined the choir. And I always wished that I could sing. I could probably carry a tune. And the choir director said, I'm going to teach you a praise song. It's like, what? I'm going to be front and center? That's all I was thinking. Yeah. And I did that. But the beauty in it was that my son would be sitting in the back of the church, and when he'd hear me start to sing, he would stop doing whatever he was doing and pay attention to his mother. So he gave me a number one fan. This is the things that I believe that God has given me since I've been sober. And the thing and how I use God, I think I heard Raquel say that. How do I use God? This is how. When I'm sponsoring or being sponsored or at a meeting, I always started with, I thank God for my life, and I thank God for my sobriety. That's the two things that I do every day. Now, if I have a God to me of my own understanding, when I don't toe the line all the time, he's not going to desert me, because those parents that I had never deserted me. And I believe that God is even bigger than them. His love for me is bigger than my parents. And they never deserted me, no matter how many rules I broke. So I ask God for forgiveness. I try to live by spiritual principles. And I keep that relationship going. I pray. I try to practice different forms of meditation so that maybe I can get a different kind of connection. But one thing I don't do is try to compare my God to anybody else's God. And then it works for me. And he just, I told you that's my favorite subject besides me is him. And then you called and asked me, Pat, hey, you want to be in conversation about God? It's like, without a shadow of a doubt, I'll do it. And so, again, I'm blessed, and I'm so grateful to be here to talk to you, Pat, talk with you, and to all of those in the little squares about God. Thank you.
I was listening for the similarities as you were talking about, and I want to say that just because I could call God by name did not mean I wasn't agnostic. Because see, I believe that God would that there was a God, but that God was not in operation in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was agnostic too. I had a name for God, but truly, I was agnostic. And I remember getting here to Alcoholics Anonymous and taking that prayer that my grandmother gave me in surrendering unconditionally, and that I got here and I began to recover. And I had to really deal with stuff on the inside of me. And I believe that I suffered from a profound sense of not enoughness.
Mm.
I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't smart enough. Wasn't good enough. I just was not enough. And that sense of not enoughness made me separate and apart from and different than everybody, and kept me separated from God too. Because God wasn't going to be messing with me. I just wasn't enough. And the issue was, and why I needed to drink, right? See, because for me, alcohol was my solution. It was never my entertainment. I didn't grow up partying. I took a drink in high school by the gym field, by the bleachers. And what happened for me is that I got some ease and comfort from those feelings that I felt.
Mhm.
And it made everything okay. It quieted that sense of not enoughness. And here I am. I never stopped believing that I was called to preach, but I didn't know what I was going to do about that because I didn't feel like I was enough.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't until being in Alcoholics Anonymous and my relationship with God evolving to not being about being good, being able to accept my humanity that I have. I will make mistakes and that God is still going to be God in my life. And the grace about that is being able to extend that grace to others, and even to extend that grace to my grandfather, knowing that here he was, this man in this tradition who didn't quite know what to do with this girl child who's saying, "Hey, Pop, I believe I hear God, and God has called me to preach," at a young age. It wasn't that he didn't think it was possible to hear God at a young age, because in his own story, he started preaching when he was 11 years old. But he was caught up in the politics of his denomination. And it wasn't until I was sober and he
Mhm.
was nearing the end of his life that he's the one who ordained me, laid his hands on me, and separated me into the ministry and told me this. He says, "I knew that you were called, and you are called." And he says, "I want you to run on and see what the end's going to be." He says, "Your great grandmother, my mother, was a preacher in the Methodist church."
Wow.
He said, "Your grandmother, she's a better preacher than me."
Mhm.
He says, "So yes, it's in you. And never let anybody," he says, "if you go to a place, make sure you tell them that you are a preacher. And if they don't let you preach, that'll let you know that that is not the place for you."
Mhm.
And and so as I begin to walk into that, now I'm sober, but I'm walking through so many different things. And I'm still contending, even having worked the 12 steps, even in that process of recovery, I find that salvation is progressive, just like recovery is.
Mhm. Mhm.
Getting close. And so I want to go into something. I was talking to my sponsor recently, and he told me something that's been transformative just recently. And I've been sharing it with different groups. And so I had a conversation. I've learned how I've committed myself to trying to the best of my ability to be a safe space and a safe place to my friends and for folk that once having been in my presence or sharing with me, that you don't feel harmed or damaged, that you feel heard and accepted, right? And so I was having a conversation with somebody that's been sober for a long time that I kind of wanted to be friends with, although early on I could see that, maybe we don't have the same values. By the time I was sharing a snapshot of her, of my life, and I felt absolutely judged by the snapshot that I shared. I don't know if you've ever been felt like you've been
Mhm.
judged by a snapshot. And so by the time I got off the phone with her, I didn't know who I was anymore. I called Ralph. Ralph, I said, can you tell me who I am? I went into a bit about the conversation. I said, and I was explaining to him, how this, how it made me feel. And he said, "Pat, I don't normally do this." He said, "But for you, I'm going to do this." He said, "This is who you are." And I'm listening. He said, "You, Pat Parker, are drenched in grace all the time." He said, he said, "not sprinkled and not dabbled." you are drenched in grace. He said the thing is that it's hard to see sometimes looking forward, but when you look back
Yeah.
over your life, over your own story, you can see what God has done. And as I begin to do that, I begin to recognize that this God, will have 100% clarity about the power of God in my life when I look back. Now, sometimes when I look forward, still gets murky because it's not, it's not even today that I believe that he cannot. The question is, will you?
Uh-huh. Yep.
But will you? It's like a total acceptance now that, yeah. And so I'm starting to look back just to see. And he was telling me, because he knows my story, he said, your story reads like, well, he didn't say this, but I'm going to say this. It reads like God wrote it. It seems like God wrote this book called Pat Parker.
Mm-hmm.
It's a New York Times bestseller, but I can only read it, the past chapters, not the future chapter.
Right.
And so here in Alcoholics Anonymous with you people, there's some things ahead of me. I have accepted the call to ministry. I have accepted the grace of God in my life. And where I am right now is still having to walk forward with what I understood at 12, that I'm called to preach the gospel. But the question is, God, how do you want me to do it, Pat Parker?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I hear you. You want me to start a virtual community where whosoever will can come. But that ain't like I saw it. That's not how I grew up, God. It's okay, Pat. Just be willing. And, Lauretta, I really love how both of us, even in the differences in our stories, have come to find God. And I really love Alcoholics Anonymous in particular because it is the place where we have been able to cross the great divides, to be in deep relationship with folk that are not like us. In fact, I was awarded a national fellowship through my job called Radical Belonging. And it's a year-long fellowship. And one of the things that drew me to it and made it easy for me to receive it was that they talked about bridging across differences. That is a principle of Alcoholics Anonymous. They don't know that I have been practicing that principle for many years. They have a way that they talk about it, but I understand it clearly. And that is that in Alcoholics Anonymous, we've been able to cross the difference of socioeconomic status, race, religion, gender,
Mm-hmm.
and be in relationship with people and
Right.
focus not on where we are different, but where we are alike and what we have a stakeholdership in. And that is being sober, remaining sober. It doesn't matter. You can be Islamic. You can be Jew. You could be whatever it is. You could be atheist. Our question is do you want to be sober?
That's right.
If you have that common bond, we can get this done together. We can meet at that intersection. And
Yeah.
so my life, only because of God, has transformed. And I'll say this in closing and give it to you, Lauretta, is that even today, I honestly believe that there are many people who believe in God, but trust is another conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That you can believe in God and not trust God.
That's for real.
Listen, from moment to moment, one day
That's
at a time. I could
yeah.
trust today and not trust him tomorrow. But we have a solution for that. Lauretta?
Yes. That reminds me, Pat, of how that why God's answer doesn't always have to be yes for me anymore is because my parents' answer was not always yes, and I never ever doubted them. And when you talk about trust, it's like, okay, that's a challenge from time to time because he might not agree with what I really want him to give me. And so therefore it's like, so I don't know, Lord, if I'm going to pray and ask you to give it to me because your answer might be no. So I'm just going to hold on to it for a minute and he'll allow me to do that until I'm ready, and as you were talking and we've been talking about God, and I'm going to close with this, is like, if I could bottle it up and give it to somebody that has not walked with God, I would do that. And because I'm still always amazed that you made it all the way to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous by yourself, basically, with all the things that I went through, not big major things, but without having this relationship where you could just pray and say, okay, God, I'm getting ready to get on this computer and I'm getting ready to talk to Pat, and I've never been here before. When you talked about not enoughness, it's like, okay, I don't really know how it's going to go, but I'm going to be talking about me and I'm going to be talking about you, so I'm going to be okay. And he said, yep, you're doing fine. So thank you, Pat, again for inviting me, and thank you, Raquel, for inviting Pat.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. I am actually that was so beautiful. That was it, because this is what this meeting is supposed to be. I that we can. I'm sorry, but we can reach this place that the soul just kneels in awe, in gratitude. That's so beautiful. I wish I can say something. I can't. I'm gonna invite Raf to just say something or ask a question until I put myself. This was beautiful. We have the best meeting ever. And I'm gonna get back to what you guys said, but I need Ralph to say something meantime. Ralph.
My name is Ralph White. I'm an alcoholic,
Hey,
and
Ralph.
two of my favorites are on the screen in front of me right now. And when Raquel came up with the idea for this meeting, then she ran it past me as she does. And I know this idea of what has this program done. And you two were like, if I wasn't already a member, when she said it's not limited to age, what she really meant was feel free to just talk, but definitely the basis is what we've been given.
Yeah.
And you two, if I had not already signed up on the dotted line, I'd say, I want to be an Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to take the journey like them two are talking about. I want that kind of grace. And so I want to thank you two for visiting us today, letting us eavesdrop, and reminded me of, because for everybody else here, I don't know if I know both of them personally, face to face, in my house, at their house. I know Loretta's husband. I know their story. I know where the bodies are buried with Pat Parker. I know. And talk about bright lights. And I believe that it's the two hallmarks of a true spiritual experience. Then I'm going to get off here. Y'all didn't call me to come talk. I believe it's a lot of hallmarks. But for me, two, one, if you can't laugh at yourself, I don't trust you. Don't come up in here being so pious and so when you have a talk about God and it's just down earth like this, that's number two, when you really have been visited by the kind of grace, you got to tell somebody. It ain't even, you got to tell somebody. It's, sometimes people be like, why you go out talking? Why do people, you got to tell somebody. When God come in you, He don't come to stay in you. You know what I'm saying? And you two have given us, wow, a sneak peek. And if it's anybody new in here, it's a preview of coming attractions. You can have that too. And I am just so honored to call both of you two, really, 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 not just acquaintances, really close friends of mine. And Lauretta, thank you for the journey all these many years, your whole sobriety. And Pat Parker, you stretch me and you grow me in ways. Lauretta is a prolific sponsor. Pat is a prolific sponsor. And one of the things when you get some people that's been with you a long time, it morphs. And so when Pat and I have our conversations, it's another conversation about God. And I appreciate both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. And we're gonna open the floor if there's questions or comments, and please feel free. Everything is okay here to say, to ask, whatever. But I want to talk about two things that were so absolutely
Raquel,
beautiful.
I'm sorry, I did have a question. I didn't mean to.
Oh, please.
I'm
Why
sorry.
are you cutting me off?
I'm sorry. I talked too long and forgot my question. And the question is for both of you. Can either of you, and I know you don't have a lot of time, can either of you speak to if you've ever in your sobriety had a crisis of faith? And if so, what did you do during that period and how did you come out?
Real quick, Ralph, when you said that, the first big crisis I had was when my aunt and uncle were in a car accident and they both died. And that was when it shook my faith. Like, how could that happen, God? How could you let my cousins lose both parents at the same time? And I didn't tell anybody, again, like that 9-year-old girl that didn't tell anybody. And I heard my niece talking to one of the brothers of that uncle, and she said, why did God kill, let them have that accident? And she said, I was simply so I can leave Pat some time. And I heard my uncle say, God did not kill them. They were in a car accident. And because Lauretta is so literal, I heard it just like that they were in a car accident. It didn't have anything to do with God. I needed to hear that in order for me to restore my faith again. So then I started just walking again. It's like, okay, I'm good. And I got back on it. So that's my best one about losing faith.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ralph. I think what happened for me is when I was about 30 years sober, I became more distant from God. And I was in a financial crisis. I lost everything. I made a decision that placed me in a position to be harmed. And I made the decision based on looking at what somebody else had. I was not satisfied where I was, and I took a risk. And, I never had a peace about the decision that I made. I would go to different people. What do you think? 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 And they were like, basically, it's up to you. But I never had a peace about it. So what happened is that I, got to the point where didn't know how I was going to pay my bills. I was hiding my car because they was coming to get it. And so I'd park it blocks away. And I'm sober and I'm ashamed. But I knew what to do. In spite of how I felt. I didn't want to tell anybody. And I go to this conference because Ronald White was leading a workshop and he asked me to participate. And he asked me to participate because I had become desperate to do another third step. I was in trouble. I knew it. And it wasn't about trouble about drinking. It was trouble about I'm in this condition. I need to shift. And the only way I know how to shift is to reconnect with God, because I felt like I had gotten away from God. Not that God had gone anywhere, but I had strayed. And so I got into Ronald's big book. He had closed the workshop, and I begged him, please let me in. And I said, I'm bringing a newcomer with me, just in case he was going to say no. And so got into the workshop, and he asked me to participate at this conference at another workshop. And he began to share his story. I was ashamed. I didn't want to, but then I just told everybody. And what happened was, coming back to that workshop, we were at the third step. And I could not wait to get on my knees again, to offer myself to God again. And God received me again. And not like magic, but the trajectory of my life changed. And now I am more successful than I've ever been in my life. And I know that it was God.
Oh, that was very good. When you guys were talking, there were a couple of very practical things that I hone in. I don't know which one. I think it was you, Pat, who said, like, when I stop praying, I stop believing. And what an amazing, it is so practical. Even Lauretta, you spoke about, let's not pray. How about you talk to God? How about you talk to God, right? I mean, those are very practical things. Like, I and this whole idea of having that profound sense of not enoughness. I think that we should term that, right? It's like, I'm not enough. I'm not sure that I know that God could. I'm not sure if He would really, like, will you? And to jump that bridge and to put it yourself in that place. And the truth of the matter is that it is always there. It is always a yes, I will, even though whatever the answer comes at the end, right? So anyways, anybody has a question, because I can also go on just to talk about all these things. Anybody would like to ask a question or say something to Pat or Lauretta?
I wanted to just say something real quick. I love that example of the believing without trust. And it's and the other thing that I thought about when that was said is how one of the interesting things that I witness all the time in AA in particular is that we can believe, or no, we can talk. Speaking of the whole idea of talking to God, we can talk to a God that we don't believe in, that we don't even, it's like, how do I even visualize and this God that I am so skeptical about? But I can still have those conversations in spite of that skepticism. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things that we have. We really have a lot of flexibility, don't we? There's no rigidity. There's no, it's really easy. And it's almost like a little spiritual experiment. I remember my sponsor would say to me, Maggie, why don't you, when I had that skepticism in the beginning, she said, why don't you, when you go to bed tonight, just picture yourself just being embraced by God, just being held and kept safe and protected, and then call me tomorrow. And because I had called her up with all kinds of, problems. And then the next day I'd called her and I said, I did that and it felt really good. It soothed me and it put me to sleep. And then she said, so have your circumstances changed in any way? And I said, no, everything's the same as yesterday. And she just taught me how, like, that taking that right action, that just like that sort of blind possibility, that word was also used, just sort of opened this thing up where, like, circumstances I perceive like this in this moment, and then the next day, because I've asked God to just hold me close, those same circumstances don't seem to be disturbing me at this moment. So anyway, I want to say more than anything, thank you. I agree with Raquel 100%. This was one of the most beautiful conversations that I've ever listened into. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Colleen, would you like to unmute yourself?
And thank you. Thank you, ladies. That was beautiful. That was truly beautiful. It was soul hitting, when it goes right into your soul. I've had lots of times in sobriety, not right now. Right now, I trust him. But there's been so many times in sobriety where I believe in God. I pray to God. I believe that there are certain things that he will do unconditionally. And one of those things is if I ask him to stay sober, he will keep me sober. I have believed that since I think I was almost 3 months sober, and I was scared I was going to drink again. Some old timer who was at the time 5 years sober. But to me, old timer, he said that if I asked, he had never heard anyone in AA say that they had drank on a day that they had asked God to keep them sober. Oh. And so I started doing that. One of the things that I know, and what you ladies are doing for us tonight, is when I walk into a meeting, because my sponsor told me I needed to go to a meeting every day. And what I know from that is that is where I found my God, in the meetings, listening to women and men like you guys talk about the miracles, because I needed a God that could do miracles, not just a God that you pray to and tell him you're sorry, not just that God. I needed a God that would do miracles. The first miracle, besides being sober, which that is the biggest of the miracles, is that I got custody of my daughter when everybody in my life assured me that I would not, including but not limited to my lawyer, promised me I would not get custody, told me that was the first miracle, I still, over 20 years later, I am speechless just thinking about that.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Carmen, you have a few minutes left. Please go ahead and mute.
Thank you. I want to thank you both. You touched on several things that just hit my heart and reinforced, my relationship with God. And, I was thinking how I had a conversation with my daughter recently about God. And I asked her, because she has a 13-year-old, and I send him scripture, I give him encouragement, so on and so forth. But I also, AA has taught me not to have boundaries. So I wanted to make sure that her understanding of God, I wasn't influencing my grandson outside of that. And I sent her to Catholic school when she was a little girl so that she could have a relationship with God, because that wasn't what I was doing. I was hungover praising God Sunday morning in my living room where I saved myself, or God saved me. I remember that. But, and the other thing is I have an app that I do every morning, and I put a prayer in there, and it shows me prayers from the past. And this morning, a prayer came up that I told God, thank you. AA has brought me into a relationship with God. We live life forward, and we understand it looking back. And there's so much that I can look back and see where he's been there all along. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll pass.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Loretta. Thank you for, allowing us to be in this conversation. It was really moving and beautiful. And all right. In closing, as stated in page 29 of our big book,